I wish you've always taken such charge.
You are listening
to the Border Chronicle.
Welcome to the Border Chronicle podcast. I am Todd Miller, a co-founder of the Border Chronicle.
Melissa Del Bosque, co-founder of the Border Chronicle.
Please come and visit us at our new website. Come check out our new website at theborderchronicle.com. And we bring news from the border, news from the border with context and analysis. And we bring this news from wherever that border might be. As you've probably seen, the border can be very many places. You've seen that, correct, Melissa?
Well, yeah, and I mean, right now the border is in Minneapolis, right? And you've been getting a lot of requests to do interviews about just Border Patrol's impunity, the fatal shootings, and how in God's earth can the Border Patrol be patrolling the streets in Minneapolis? And I like to push Todd's book, Border Patrol Nation, which came out in 2014, and just talks about the incredible reach that Border Patrol has.
Yeah, in fact, too, we are recording on a sort of national day of solidarity for Minneapolis, right? For what's been going on in Minneapolis, a national day of action. In fact, my kids are not in school because of this. They're right down below me. So if they pop in, that's part of what's going on today. Sometimes they like to do that. They like to show their faces. But it's a very intriguing day to be recording. There's going to be some major demonstrations throughout the country. Here in Tucson, where Melissa and I both are, there's going to be one that we will both be going and reporting on later on. And Melissa, I believe your child too is not at school. Is that correct?
Yeah. No, I've got a 17-year-old. He stayed home, and we're going to go to the protest. So the protest is going to be in front of the federal building here in downtown Tucson, and we're expecting thousands and thousands of people to show up in solidarity, with what's happening, Chicago, Minneapolis, various parts of the country where we've just seen extreme brutality and, state-sanctioned violence being pushed by this administration, and, including two fatalities in the last couple of weeks in Minneapolis. And I'll add that the first agent that fatally shot Renee Good was an ICE agent, but he used to be a Border Patrol agent and had been one for several years in El Paso before going to ICE. And then the second shooting of Alex Pretti was by a Border Patrol agent who was there, under the control of Greg Bovino, former El Centro Border Patrol sector chief, who's now been and then roving Border Patrol commander of the nation, and now he's been sent back, apparently, to El Centro, unfortunately for border.
Which is the most violent. Some stats have come out on the El Centro sector, and it's the most violent sector of all the sectors along the U.S.-Mexico border, like strikingly so.
Yeah, so it's interesting that the administration chose him, the sector chief of the most violent sector, to oversee the nationwide command of Border Patrol and ICE in various cities. So, of course, he was marching around Chicago before showing up in Minneapolis in his long coat, which looked very Gestapo, but apparently that is standard winter issue for Border Patrol. I'd never seen one of those coats. We report on the southern border, so we don't see the agents up north there where it gets cold wearing those coats. That's the first coat I've seen. Have you ever seen one of those?
I have not, but like you say, I mean, I go up and do some reporting in Buffalo every once in a while, but it's usually in the summer. I imagine if I was there in the winter, I'd see a few of those coats. They're striking. They're very striking. I had to do a triple take to like take in what I was seeing.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because people talk a lot about ICE, obviously, but they don't talk about the Border Patrol's role in all of this mayhem and these fatalities. And I'm interested, Todd. Like, what you've been doing a lot of interviews. You were just on Democracy Now talking about this. Like, what have people been asking you? And I'm hoping you can talk about your findings for Border Patrol Nation, because I think people will be surprised to hear that Border Patrol have reach around the world. They train border guards in different parts of the world, and they have done so for some time. And at the same time, they have no oversight. They're pretty poorly trained, although I would say they have these strike teams and stuff, right, that are very militarized, very paramilitary. So I'm curious, what kind of questions have people been asking you, and I mean, what do you want to reflect on moving on from this book that you wrote about Border Patrol more than 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think there's a number of points. One of them is it is interesting, like you bring up, Melissa, that a lot of you see a lot of references to ICE, and ICE, of course, right? ICE is very involved. ICE agents are very involved in, for example, the operation in Minnesota has 3,000 agents. 2,000 are ICE, but 1,000 are Customs and Border Protection, or mainly U.S. Border Patrol. And so thinking about that, right, those components of it, and that the fact that the whole operation in Minneapolis and in Chicago and in Los Angeles, right, if you remember back to the summer, the LA operation, they're all commanded by Greg Bovino, the El Centro sector chief that Melissa just mentioned. So it's a border patrol. Border Patrol are the commanding officers of these operations. So what is happening in a lot of ways? I mean, they're distinct, but you can see what I would call the extension of the border, of what we see on the U.S.-Mexico border, and from a bunch of different angles, the brazen impunity that we see on the U.S.-Mexico border, for example, of Border Patrol agents, and the kind of abuse, killings, that where agents or the Border Patrol itself is never convicted, right? So there's this kind of shroud of impunity that seems to surround the Border Patrol, and hence ICE and these operations. And you can see how clear that is as they bring this north into the city. It's like a bunch of roving borders, right? If you can think of the border apparatus as this roving group, and it's like, oh, here's the border, let's put it in Chicago. Here's the border, let's put it in Memphis. Here's the border, let's put it in Charlotte. Here's the border, let's put it in Minneapolis. And then you can see, like, it's so interesting going through the photos, and you see like say like protest barricades, and then Border Patrol lined up one after the other, after the other, after the other. I'm like, oh, that they're enacting a literal border, and they probably call it perimeter surveillance or something like that.
Yeah.
But a literal border right there in Minneapolis, right? So it's this extension of the border. It's like the Border Patrol Nation, right? The idea that the border itself is can be. It's also, like, it's not only on the U.S.-Mexico border, it's expansive. It's been a long time on the northern border as well. But if you look at Minneapolis, it's 300 miles away from the U.S.-Canada border. And they're well out of the jurisdiction that's been set aside in which Border Patrol can operate, and that's a 100-mile jurisdiction, 300 miles. And they're actually then, I think we're in a point where we're seeing, I don't know what you think, I'd love to hear what you think, Melissa. We're at a point where I keep thinking back to, like, the 1994 operations, like Operation Gatekeeper, Operation Safeguard, Operation Hold the Line, in which that drastically changed what Border Patrol was doing as far as implementing the deterrence strategy. And that came with this upsurge of budgets, right? And it was forever changed after that. I'm wondering, with Operation Metro Surge, Operation Midway Blitz, Operation Return the Sender. That's the actual name of the operation in
Do you
California.
think they're using Chat GPT to come up with these names? I mean,
The
who's
names.
catch of the day in Maine? I mean, come on,
Catch of the Day is the one in Maine. Oh my
Yeah,
lord.
it's
Yeah.
ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm wondering, is this like one of those moments that we're seeing this border, what the border is, change before our eyes, and will it be, is that going to be something that's going to persist?
Oh, this is
Um,
absolutely one of those moments. I mean, they're getting what, 178 billion? Is it billion or million?
billion,
Billion.
billion, billion. Yep, over
Yeah.
4 years. Yep.
Yeah. So they've got more money than most military forces around in countries around the world. I mean, they have more money than, you know, armies. So it's absolutely going to change everything. And I think in the debate that we're having nationally, what drives me crazy is that everybody keeps referring to ICE. We need to abolish ICE, but we need to like widen the scope and see this border industrial system as a whole, right? Because it's also Border Patrol, it's DHS, it's DHS, it's the Department of Homeland Security that really needs to be abolished as a whole. You can't just tackle ICE. You've got to look at the whole thing. And it's surprising to me how little most Americans know about Border Patrol or journalists as well, because they're not really reporting on Border Patrol that much. They just keep talking about ICE. And ICE is only one facet of the problem, from my view.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's entirely correct. The whole apparatus, like they are part and parcel of the same apparatus, but they're different facets of it or different agencies, right? Like traditionally, I guess ICE was doing the interior enforcement, although they are stationed on the border as well. And then the Border Patrol traditionally is on the border, but that they're in the interior as well with the 100-mile zones, right? And actually, I remember talking to a Border Patrol PIO or public information officer when I tried to ask about the 100-mile zone, and he said, he answered me, he said, "We're everywhere. Haven't you looked at the sectors?" And you go look at the sectors, and they're like, "Oh yeah, they are. They're literally sectors that cover the entire country." And that includes, like, for example, the Super Bowl is, what is it? It's in a little over a week. Always, Border Patrol has been going to the Super Bowl for decades now and become a part of this massive surveillance team, along with the rest of DHS. Like the whole DHS apparatus goes, and yeah, so that part of it, and then also like, so when I try to calculate and look at the budgets, I always combine CBP and ICE. I think you probably could add even some more agencies, but I think that's one way to monitor and look at the sort of like how they're growing and how the apparatus is growing. So I always put CBP and ICE together just to see. And with this new funding that went through the that BBBA, I never can remember that the big beautiful bill
I
act,
refuse to
right?
call it that because
Yeah, I don't want to call it that.
I just say
I start.
Trump's budget. Yeah.
Yeah, Trump's budget. Anyhow, so you get that $178 billion infused into that, and then the budget for 2025 was $33.5 billion if you take CBP and ICE and put them together, and that's it's a huge jump. Like one of those, I think you have to go back to when DHS was first initiated, those George W. Bush years, to
Yeah.
see a jump that much that we've seen from 2024, which was actually already at a record number. It has exceeded 30 billion, to what we're seeing in 2025, and then what we probably will see in 2026 this year. I imagine it's going to be around $35 billion or even more. Those combined budgets. And I think, yeah, like you got to look at those numbers and the budgets, and then and see like and then you start getting this holistic kind of look at what this is and what this apparatus is and where it is and how far it extends. And then the sort of analysis, like you were saying, Melissa, I think then shifts like what maybe we should be looking at this
As a
in
whole.
these
Yeah.
broader ways. Yeah.
Right, right. And I mean, you and I, we've reported on the border a long time. So we've always reported on Border Patrol. And I would say I've reported less on ICE because the differences between them, well, I mean, Border Patrol's had mission creep for years and years and years, creeping further and further into the interior, but ICE was in charge of the interior. And so they would come into contact more with people in the interior and, long-term residents who were in deportation process. And then Border Patrol was limited to within 100 miles of the border, like you were saying. And they do have some pretty expansive powers within that 100 miles. Do you want to talk about that, Todd, like what they can do?
It's one of the most vivid interviews I've ever had was when, and I mentioned this in the piece that came out in the Border Chronicle on Thursday.
It's a great piece. People should check it out.
Yeah, it's called Border Patrol Nation, but with a question mark.
Yeah, it's really like an extension of your book. Yeah.
Yeah, so I tried to take the book and give it like the analysis to our current moment, or try to look at the current moment. But concerning the 100-mile zone, I bring up this interview that I did with an official in the CBP headquarters in Washington, D.C. I think that was in 2018. And I was just doing this long interview. It was about the internationalization or the extension or the externalization of the U.S. border and how the U.S. border operations are going abroad, which is another long topic we could talk about.
Yeah.
But we got to talking about the jurisdiction, and he was talking about the 100-mile zone, the official. It was a plainclothed official. And then he just said to me, he said, "We are exempted from the Fourth Amendment." And I went, he just said it straight out like that. I went, "Really? You're just going to say it like that?" And I'm writing it down, recording. It was one of those meetings that I couldn't record or I couldn't attribute it. It was off the record. Right. It was an off the record meeting. But but he said, he said that. So it was and that's what I think every time I think of the 100-mile zone, how confidently he said it, the tone of his voice, the way he said it, and how the words just came out straight out, like he's said that 100 times before. And that's the right not to be searched nor seized, right? That right that you're not going to get like totally interrogated for no reason, or you're going to get pulled over and have your car searched, or those sorts of things. It's the very very thing that the ACLU, way back when in the early 2000s, called the 100-mile zone the Constitution-free zone. Now, the ACLU says not to say that now because they are a constitutional, organization. The
Constitution is there, yes.
Yeah, the Constitution is definitely there, so let's make that clear.
And this is the entire circumference of the U.S., by the way. So this includes like Los Angeles, New York City. I mean, it includes
a lot of the places where they are now, like Portland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A large chunk of the American population,
200 million,
is within their zone, but it's not true that they're exempt, right? So talk about that distinction, like what they can and cannot do.
So they do have extra constitutional powers, right? They can do, like reasonable suspicion, right? Is which basically means the criteria of the agent. That whatever that particular, like if you go through a checkpoint in southern Arizona, like Melissa and I and the rest of the Border Chronicle people are always going through, if they think, there's something about the way you answer. I once had a Border Patrol agent describe to me all the different ways. If you're clenching your steering wheel with both of your hands, that was if you have only one key. Like there's these things that you never.
Yeah.
Yeah, things that you never would even really think of, and that could just spurn into this other. All of a sudden, you're in secondary inspection, and you're getting patted down, and then You're getting interrogated and asked this and that. I just had it happen. So I've just had an experience while working on a story, actually. Um, and so, yeah, so there's those sorts of, I guess I would call it the slippery slope or the erosion of rights. I would call it a constitution mangled zone. Maybe that's a more
Yeah, I
accurate way
think
to
that's a
put it.
good term for it. And then with regards to your property, is it within 40 miles that they can enter your property without a warrant, but they can't go into your house?
Yeah, I think it's 20. We'll have to double check that. I thought it was 25, but it might be 40. 25 miles or 40 miles,
Yeah,
one of the two.
yeah.
And they can't go into a dwelling, but they use the word dwelling too. So let's use our imaginations of what that means. I imagine a house, or that could be something else too, I guess. And then, but they can go on your property without a warrant.
Right. And then we just had the Associated Press report on this secret document where they're allowing federal agents, ICE and Border Patrol, to go into homes without a warrant. Oh, without a judicial warrant, which is super, worrying and unconstitutional and illegal. So that's like in a further extension, right, of this wide purview that Border Patrol already has had in the borderlands for so many years. I mean, when you did that interview with that agent who said, "Oh, the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to us," that was like 2018, right?
Yeah, 2018. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was years ago. So in watching the way that they're operating now, it's not surprising, right, to us or to people who live along the border, unfortunately.
Yep. Not at all. In
And
fact, that's
well, and
go
with
ahead.
regard to fatalities too, and the investigation of those, and Jen Budd, I just did a podcast with Jen Budd, who had been she's a former Border Patrol agent, and now, a leading critic of the agency, and has done a lot of research around their impunity and corruption, and she talks about, they have these cover-up teams, and that. That the shootings and the way that they're handled are very questionable.
Yeah, and that's when I think about the shootings and killings that have happened in Minneapolis. That's the context I use, right? I think of, it's on one hand sort of shocking in the sense that these are new operations that are going in the middle of cities, so that part of it is totally shocking. But there's another part of it that's very unsurprising, and that comes straight from Jen Budd's analysis, or the reporting that we've seen and done on the border for decades now, where this sort of impunity of the killings, like I think immediately of Ray Mattia, for example, Ray Mattia, who stepped out of his house in 2023. I think it was May of
Yeah.
2023. Stepped out of his house, and Border Patrol, he had a sheathed machete, and the Border Patrol asked him to throw it down, and he threw it down to the ground. And then he raised his hands. I guess he had a phone in his hand, and they just sent several agents shot dozens of bullets at him, 9 of them that hit him, and he died, right? And that's like stuff we hear all the Jose Antonio Elena Rodriguez, the 16-year-old who was walking to meet his brother where he was working in a tienda, a little store in Nogales on the Mexican side. The Border Patrol agents said that people were throwing rocks, and the Border Patrol agents were on the U.S. side, on the other side of the wall, on the other side of the bollard wall, which is basically bars, so you can
Yeah.
go through them, and put their gun through the bars and shot into the United States, hitting Jose Antonio like 10 times, right, and
I mean,
killing
he
him.
shot into Mexico from the United States. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And there was a spate of those shootings around, that happened in 2012, I believe. And there was a spate of shootings between 2010 and 2012 where U.S. Border Patrol agents were shooting into Mexico, killing people fatally on the Mexican side. There were I was in Texas reporting from the border there, and there were quite a few shootings there. There was a very infamous one in El Paso where an agent shot a young man on the Juarez side, on the Mexican side of the border. And then the Supreme Court ruled that if you were killed in Mexico by a U.S. agent, that you had no standing in U.S. court because you weren't on U.S. soil. So it was like, what? I mean, if you imagine what would happen if a Mexican agent shot a U.S. citizen from across the border, I mean, there would be all.
What would happen? Like, what do you think would happen if that happened?
Trump
Wouldn't that be
invading Mexico right now?
right? Yeah.
Undoubtedly, but U.S. agents have done this several times. And that happened after there was a huge effort made to recruit a lot of agents. And so they did that, and these agents didn't have a lot of training, had some questionable backgrounds, so we saw a huge uptick in violence and fatal shootings. And that happened, I think, during the latter end of the George W. Bush administration, right, when they made that big surge of agents, Border Patrol agents.
Hiring surge, yeah.
Hiring surge. And then the first Obama administration, there were a bunch of murders, like bunch of fatal Border Patrol shootings. Because I remember I was keeping a tally of them, because at that point in time, we didn't have like a running tally of how many fatal shootings there were. And a lot of them were not reported very much, especially in Texas, because it's so massive. The border is so long, and so much of it is rural, so it's hard. You would find these accounts in little local newspapers, and it would be just like a paragraph, of agents came into contact with somebody and shot them in Mexico, and I'd be like, what? And then try to do more research on it and figure it out. At this point, the ACLU and the Southern Border Communities Coalition have been keeping a running tally. That started around 2010 when we started seeing these huge upticks in Border Patrol violence. And I think they've got 364 deaths now tallied since 2010. That's including Renee Good and Alex Pretti. I remember one year in Laredo, the city of Laredo, in 2018, all of the murders in the city had been committed by Border Patrol agents. There was a serial killer Border Patrol agent who killed 4 people. There was another Border Patrol agent who killed his mistress and his baby. So, you have this narrative that, we'll send more agents and they're gonna keep everybody safe. They're gonna, but often they make things more dangerous for communities because of the lack of oversight, the lack of training, and the impunity, because Congress just refuses to rein them in. And I wonder if you could talk about that, because there's that famous scene with Senator Leahy I'm hoping you can talk about.
Oh, yeah. And
he did make some sort of attempt to rein them in, but what happened there?
The famous scene with Leahy, the one I'm thinking about is the checkpoint.
Yeah.
Senator Leahy, he was traveling in the state of New York, in his car that had license plates clearly labeling that he was a senator of the United States. And he went through a Border Patrol checkpoint. It was kind of near Syracuse, New York, maybe about 125 miles away from the border, so it was a little bit outside of the jurisdiction. And Leahy, this was, I believe it was in 2008 or 2009. So to give you context, this is when we're seeing this massive surge of budgets going into for the recently formed Department of Homeland Security. The DHS gave the CBP and ICE, and DHS in general has a priority mission to stop quote unquote terrorists and weapons of mass destruction from crossing the border. You just see lots and lots of money being poured into it. I believe the budgets during the George W. Bush administration, it went from about $4 billion for border and immigration enforcement to about 14 billion, something like some remarkable number of
Yeah.
like in the 8 years of George W. Bush, the budgets went way up. So Leahy's like traveling towards the end of the second George W. Bush term, and he hits this checkpoint, and this border patrol agent asks him to get out of his car, and then Leahy responds by saying, "Under whose authority?" And then the border patrol agent, according to Leahy, his testimonial of what happened, the border patrol agent then tapped on his gun, his holstered gun, and said, "That's the only authority I need."
Yeah. And
And
this is to a sitting, elected official, a senator. He says this,
right,
right? And the senator,
yes,
I mean, that's a perfectly logical question. Like, I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm 125 miles. I'm not even near the border. And you want me to get out of my car? Why? And the guy puts his hand on his gun and says, "This is my authority," you know? So he did file some legislation, right, to try to rein that in, but met with the same story that we hear over and over and over again, that we can't have immigration reform until the border is secure. So that legislation, I don't think it was part of the comprehensive immigration reform package, right? And I'm not sure that really went anywhere. I think he was able to limit something to like within 40 miles of the northern border, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
Was that did that get encompassed in the immigration reform package of 2012, the Gang of Eight one? Was that in? I can't remember where exactly
Yeah.
Leahy's legislation
I
went
think
into.
he tried to get it in there a couple of times, but
Because you remember that bill? That bill was $45 billion going to the border, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, ridiculous amounts of money going to the border in that reform bill that didn't pass. It passed in the Senate, but didn't pass in the House.
And this is the issue that I was just talking to Andrea Flores about in another podcast, because she worked for the Biden administration and she's worked for elected officials in the Democratic Party for many, many years, about this narrative that we're trapped in of like, we can't fix immigration till we secure the borders. And the border is never, ever secure. And in the meantime, both parties just keep pouring billions and billions of dollars into this Frankenstein that we now have attacking people on the streets in Minneapolis, Maine, different parts of the country. This is a system that was built by both parties. And it's like, how do we get off this crazy train and stop, like, I've been reporting on this for 20 years. I want to bash my head into the wall. It's like the border is not secure. Senator John Cornyn, who we used to call Corn Dog in Texas, he's running for like the gazillionth time. He's a Republican senator. He just came out and is like, well, we can't do anything until the border is secure. It's like, I've literally heard him say that for the last 15 years. It's like more than a third of the border is under military control. There's walls, there's surveillance. It's like, so what exactly would a secure border look like? I mean, it's just this rhetorical trope that they keep falling into so they can just pour more money into this trough. And
I heard the Trump administration try to do 100%. They said, talk about 100% operational control. And anyone, it's impossible, right?
Mexico is our number one trading partner. Millions and millions of people cross the border every day, just doing normal things, going shopping, going to school, visiting, family. It makes there's no end goal. It makes no sense. We're now going to get now the Trump administration wants double walls, on the border. So they're going to
Which means nice new contracts for Fisher Sand and Gravel.
Oh
and,
my God. Billions of dollars going into the pockets of a lot of companies that in turn funded Trump's campaign. So it's like this circular thing, like we'll give you billions, you give them back to us when we run, you know. And of course this happens with both parties, but you know, Fisher Sand and Gravel is pretty well documented. And he was, you know, the guy who was behind the We Build the Wall, which turned out to be like, you know, they were indicted for taking money and then using it for other things. And it was a whole grift. And so he built this private border wall in Mission, Texas that is still there and is like falling apart. And in turn, got all these contracts that he's continuing to get with billions and billions of dollars. Anyway, I could go.
But you're talking about another huge thing that is like the industrial complex, this whole complex of relationships that is behind all these mechanisms and machinations that we're seeing before us, right?
Right.
And that there's this deep, like we're seeing the tip of the iceberg, and the iceberg is deep. And to as we like talk about abolishing ICE, for example, or those sorts, using that sort of like, let's get rid of this thing. Well, we got to look at that too, right? We got to look into this massive relationship. And what you're talking to reminded me of the Border Security Expo I went to in Phoenix in April. And that was the first one of the Trump administration. I was amazed because the Biden administration had the record number of contracts during its 4 years. More than I think it had $32 billion worth of contracts, which was above 20 billion. 20 billion was the first iteration of Trump. Then Biden comes in and has 32 billion in his 4 years, which is the record for
the first Trump administration
by 12 billion, right?
Yeah.
And so when I went to the Border Security Expo, I'm there, and they're getting like Kristi Noem is speaking, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and Thomas Homan, the quote unquote border czar, who's now in Minnesota. Yeah, they're both speaking and getting standing ovations from this industry heavy but kind of frenzied crowd, you know, applauding. I'm like, wow. So there was record number of contracts under Biden, but they're really, really roused up with these Trump, you know, these Trump people, and I'm just curious about it. I think I know why, right? We know why now, of course.
They're going to get 10 times more money than what Biden gave them.
And exactly what happened. Yeah. Go to 2025 and you look at the budgets, or he was $15 billion. $15 billion in 2025 of contracts from CBP and ICE. That tops the largest ever, which was $9 billion under Biden. It was about 9.8 billion. So it's almost 5 billion. This again is a gigantic jump. So we're seeing not only acceleration on a number of fronts, we're also seeing an acceleration of this industrial complex, which I just keep imagining. What I imagine is this like machine circling and getting more entrenched. And it like the lubrication of the things that are happening behind closed doors in Washington, and the campaign contributions and the lobbying and all that stuff just keeps going faster and faster.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Eisenhower way back when warned about the military industrial complex, right? Which I really see as that extension. Well, that extension that the U.S. has, where it's just around the globe, right? It's got its bases, it's got its rockets, all that. The border security industrial complex is increasingly about the interior of the U.S. It's a domestic industrial complex that's now like blowing back on us, you know? I mean, I know the border extends globally too, right? And I mean, you've written whole books about that, right? But I feel like this border Frankenstein has much more direct tentacles into the domestic sphere, you know, into the interior of the country. It's not even about the border at all.
Yeah, and it's more so now than ever, right?
Yeah, I mean, you really see it plain as day when you've got the border czar in Minneapolis.
And having a border czar. Like
Yeah, and why do we have a border
the
czar? Why is everybody a czar now? I don't know.
yeah.
Very, very curious. This must be Trump's love affair with Putin that we have to have czars now everywhere.
Maybe so, yeah. And I was quoted in the Border Patrol Nation piece that ran on Border Chronicle on Thursday, a constitutional lawyer who's called DHS, this is in 2014, a standing army on U.S. soil.
Yeah.
Like, we have the posse comitatus, which prohibits the army from
Right.
doing any sort of operations on U.S. soil. But lo and behold, look what we got. We have the constitutional lawyer calls a standing army on U.S. soil. It's very much a hybridized police
Paramilitary organization.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about that? Like, talk about like BORTAC, right? Because BORTAC is like one of these special Border Patrol strike teams and the kind of training that they get. And these guys were in Portland during the first Trump administration, kidnapping people off the streets in white vans, which was insane.
Yeah, that was almost like the...
And these are the guys that are following Bovino around too, right? I mean, they're fully kitted out in like military tactical gear. They look like soldiers, but they're Border Patrol agents.
They are. And that, I almost think of the Portland incident, which happened right after George Floyd. And that was in 2020 when all those protests were happening. And it's almost like that was a pilot.
Yeah, it was a test.
It was a test. And at the time, I did some work on it. I think I wrote a piece on it, looking at the 100-mile zones, right? Because Portland literally is in the 100-mile zone.
It is. Yeah.
But yeah, it was so surprising. Even knowing what we knew at the time, it was so surprising to see that BORTAC, which is the tactical unit, the SWAT unit, you could say, of the U.S. Border Patrol, the ones that they're going to do, like, they're the most tactical. If you look, I was just looking at the pictures from Minneapolis, and I just kept seeing, the agents with the most equipment, where they have the helmets, and I know a lot of them had that.
They're like a SWAT team or something, right? Sort of.
Yeah, and then I noticed a lot of BORTAC. So the BORTAC, it would say police and then BORTAC. It wouldn't even say Border Patrol, but knowing that we know BORTAC. And BORTAC, by the way, they're the ones that do the international training too. So they're the ones that are going abroad. So bringing BORTAC being kind of, I wonder, I mean, this is something we probably will look at with Border Chronicle, I'm sure, with some of our investigations into this, is that how much is BORTAC at the leading edge of this?
Yeah.
I'm curious. I wonder if Melissa, like, was he BORTAC before? I'm guessing he might have been. He seems very BORTAC-y.
He does. I'm not sure. And can you just define what BORTAC is for people listening who may not know what BORTAC is? Because a lot of people they're seeing that, like you said, on the patch, and it says police. People aren't going to know what that even means.
Yeah, it says BORTAC. It's TAC for tactical unit, right? SWAT team. It will do those operations, the most dangerous operations for the Border Patrol on the border. That's what. Yeah. So, like, I guess snatching up protesters from Portland, which they were doing, is, there would be the. I'm curious if there was an incident in Chicago where you have Border Patrol agents. This is the stuff that BORTAC will do, rappelling out of helicopters, coming down into apartment buildings, like barging through windows. In this case, they were claiming that they thought there was a gang, an international gang, a Venezuelan gang, I think, that is somewhere in this apartment building. Then they proceeded to go and pull people out of their bed, regardless of who they were, children, U.S. citizens, But this is egregious, I know, but this is a part of the operations. They're the ones that do the most dangerous operations, the tactical unit of the U.S. Border Patrol. Not many people know who they are. I most studied them for their international work too when I was doing the book on it, the international policing. But that's what they do. So it is absolutely no surprise that they're going to be working on the front lines of these operations that we're seeing across the United States. I think BORTAC, Melissa, I almost, remember, looking at a BORTAC and wondering, would this, when you think about a border patrol nation or this kind of extension of the border patrol throughout the country, they naturally would be like the unit that I would think would be the front lines of that. They would be the ones that would come in first, if they're going to come and do something in some sort of place, right?
Yeah, I suspect a lot of those guys that were surrounding Bovino were BORTAC guys, and so they do trainings all around the world. And you've written about this. Like, where are some of the countries that they're training in, and what kind of training are they doing?
So they train border patrols. They go. I remember one time I was in Guatemala, and so they were in Guatemala. I was trying to get an interview with the commander of the newly formed border patrol that was going to be on the Guatemalan Honduran border, and I got there a little bit late for a lot of reasons. I won't go into it, but I was trying to convince them to still let me have the interview, and the soldier, who probably was an 18-year-old Guatemalan soldier, who he asked me, "Are you BORTAC?" And I went, "What?" I went, "So BORTAC." I immediately thought, wow.
You don't strike me as the BORTAC kind of guy, Todd.
I don't. That was my first thought. I'm like, should I be offended by this?
He just saw some white gringo, and he thought, okay, are you BORTAC? You're like,
are you BORTAC?
No.
Yeah. And then I thought, well, he knows who BORTAC is. I go into the United States, and nobody knows who BORTAC is. So, I mean, what I was trying to find out was how much the United States had been in this military-based training, this new unit, and indeed they had been there. And when I did get in to interview the commander, and then I got in another time, and they gave me a whole demonstration of all the things that they learned from the trainings, including enacting checkpoints. Right? They gave me a whole huge training how they put together one of their jeeps, the armored jeeps that they also got from the United States. And they like, the commander was next to me, and he was like, "Watch, I'm gonna time how quick they are." So he had a stopwatch, and I got to watch all the joint. They called it a joint task force, the Maya Chorti. That's what it was called. And they would run into these jeeps, mount the guns. They'd fly around the military base and then enact this checkpoint, and then they sent a couple other soldiers or parts of this unit. It was actually a hybrid police military unit, and they'd come through like they were just people like smuggling drugs or something like that, and they enacted the whole thing. So that's like one example. They showed them like getting pinned to the ground and being arrested. Sort of the basic border patrolling stuff that you see on the U.S.-Mexico border that we've been seeing in Minneapolis with protesters as well.
Yeah, and I think they've done trainings in Kenya, right? In Africa.
Oh yeah.
As well.
Probably 100 countries.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire around the globe. Yeah.
So basically what they are is an extension of like the US border empire, right? They are dispatched to different countries to train them to guard borders and really kind of enforce the U.S. hegemonic rule, right? Like, U.S. doesn't want anybody crossing the Guatemalan border into Mexico, so we're going to train you and put you there and have you just like push people back.
Yep, that's pretty much what it is. Like, and have those checkpoints up, and the way the United States, and they're quite forthright about it. They call it the extension of the border or the pushing out of the zone of security. And they say, I think it's like it goes into bigger things like you were talking about, hegemonic rule of the U.S. around the world. Mm-hmm. But they say we're stopping people thousands of miles before they even get to the U.S. border from getting to the U.S. border. So in fact, with this, you have to reconfigure what you think of the U.S. border as it's this. It goes way out, thousands of miles into the exterior, through the Western Hemisphere, throughout the world. John Kelly, remember the first DHS secretary of Trump? Yeah. He said our border should not be, he used football, the U.S. football analogy, and not on the goal line. It should be always a goal line stance, like the U.S. Mexico border was a goal line. But it should start. And he said, I can remember his quote precisely: 1,500 miles to the south. In Peru, and by the way, Peru is like 2,500 miles. 1,500 miles is Zacapa, is Guatemala. But his whole point was that this is a big strategy of the United States. In fact, right now, a lot of what we're seeing, and that isn't talked about and probably should be talked about a lot more, is what Mexico is doing on its southern border with Guatemala, and how much pressure there has been from the United States, and how much enforcement and reinforcement, how many trainings there have been from the United States, the biometric kiosk, that kind of digital border that's been set up in southern Mexico. And this sort of pushbacks, you hear about that in Europe, right? Pushing back people.
Yeah.
You're hearing about that a lot in Mexico. Like, people will travel and go through an immigration checkpoint and not have documents, and say they're in Oaxaca, which is a little bit further north. They'll get pushed back into Chiapas and have to start again. So there's this what analysts have said, like, are wearing out of the people from. So you have to look at that. That's another huge part of the border system that probably doesn't get enough attention.
Yeah, and now it's just boomeranging into the interior, right? It's like the border is in the Midwest of the U.S. It's like the U.S. has built out this giant apparatus, which is very susceptible to politicization. You know, we have a politically elected secretary of the Department of Homeland Security who's clearly very willing to do whatever Trump wants. And then you've got the largest federal law enforcement force, which is ICE and CBP, at her disposal, at Trump's disposal. And so now they're being, we've got this politicized paramilitary army domestically. I was just reading, interestingly, that there aren't many countries that have these paramilitary forces, that have been created recently, I guess, that the U.S. is only one of them. I don't know. I mean, obviously, this is not a recent force, right? It's grown over the last 20 years. So it's actually not that recent. It's just people are becoming aware of it now because they're like literally killing people in the streets, in Minneapolis, in Chicago. So this brings to mind, I think we should definitely do an episode on how they can be legally reined in. Like, we need to offer some more hopeful material, right? Federal immunity and all that. Like, what can Congress do? I know Congress is not doing anything, but I feel like we have to build out that infrastructure for the future of, something more positive, something that we can do to rein this in.
It's interesting, though, like, we could kind of finalize what our today's conversation, looking at, I do, like, today, like, we're recording on the National Day of Action, this sort of spurring on, and the sort of while we did complain about people are talking about ICE more than anything else at the very beginning. At least they're talking about ICE, right?
Yeah.
These sorts of things are being talked about,
right?
In ways that more like it's dominating the news cycles, conversation about ICE, and now I think hopefully more CBP and Border Patrol this understanding that this is a big apparatus, and that and those sorts of conversations weren't happening before. I think like bringing these things to light are very positive. And then today, like 20 schools in Tucson are not functioning. They were closed.
Well, they're closed because the teachers have walked out as part of this general strike, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean, right? The general strike. There's this general strike happening that's impactful. Maybe I haven't seen schools closed down like this. There seems to be a response from the people at this grassroots level that I think, I mean, if tradition shows it, it does pressure. It brings pressure on Congress, right? It brings pressure on politicians. And sometimes when, just me and you are reporting, maybe, we'll get some attention from some Congress people, but the pressure, the below pressure, really, I think is the silver lining to look at, that we are at a threshold here, that are, there's questions about, are people really going to tolerate what is going on? It seems like it's starting to shift and we're in a different direction, possibly, right? It's hard to predict.
Yeah. I mean, there just needs to be a sustained attention on DHS as a whole. And the only way there's going to be any change is through the people. Congress isn't going to do anything. People are going to have to push their congressional members to make that change and to rein them in, because we have a paramilitary force, at the president's bidding right now, that's been built up over many years by both Democrats and Republicans. So now that, ICE has America's attention, we need to sustain that attention and really focus on how to put an end to this. And the only way it's going to happen is collectively through the people asking for that change. So, people, please check out our new site, theborderchronicle.com. We moved from Substack, and we're on a new platform now called Ghost. It's another newsletter platform, and we're going to be focusing a lot on these issues, talking to a lot of people about this, about how we can make positive change, how we can get the paramilitary off our streets. We are probably going to be doing some invited talks with experts, which our subscribers can participate in and ask questions. So we can open up this conversation to more people and talk about experts and talk about what we can do to pressure our elected members to do something, and what we can do just as citizens to affect positive change, so that we don't have more people dying and being, whole communities being terrorized. So on that positive note, is there anything more you wanted to add, Todd?
No, I think that's good. I think, hopefully, come check out our new website. We like to, we consider ourselves to be a community too at the Border Chronicle. So we want to extend that, to you as much as possible, and, lots of things to think through and ponder. And we're always looking to hear what your thoughts are. So.
Yeah. I mean, one of our main goals is to create a forum for people, to talk about hey, here's what I'm experiencing in my community, here's how we could make change. So we want to help foster that dialogue, because gosh, it's just so grim right now, right? But it's super encouraging to see everybody just really organizing, at the grassroots level to turn things around, and I think they will turn around. It's just going to take some time.
Because you've always taken such charge.
Llegó justo antes del aguacero.
You are listening
To the Border Chronicle.